All right. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We're waiting on a few more people, but as they come, we will let them in. We are very, very thrilled to have December's, which is obviously a crazy month with the holidays. So we decided to do it in January so that more people could attend. And here we are. But Bianca Marias, have I said your last name right?
Hooray. It's fine, whichever way. Yeah.
Is the author of the best-selling novel, The Witches of Moonshine Manor, as we all know, because we have now read that. But as well, you're also the author of Hum If You Don't Know the Words, and If You Want to Make God Laugh, and the Audible original, The Prine Viper. So we'll love to hear a little bit about those three works as well throughout this call. You taught at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies, where you were awarded an Excellence in Teaching Award for Creative Writing in 2021, which was not very long ago. She runs the Eunice Ngodo Own Voices initiative to empower young Black women in Africa to write and publish their own stories, and fundraises to assist grandmothers in Soweto with caring for children who have been orphaned by HIV and AIDS. So much to unpack here, Bianca. She's the co-host of the popular podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. Love to hear about that as well, which is aimed at helping emerging writers become published. And she's an experienced public speaker who is in great demand for various events. And then there is a lot of links on her website, ladies. If you want to find out about any of these different parts of Bianca, then I advise you to visit her website to see those different links. And I will publish the link to her website in the chat. But Bianca, tell us all the things. Tell us all the things in between what I have just read.
Well, I'm firstly apologizing for the wind in my hair. I was explaining that I turned 47 yesterday, and I have been experiencing perimenopause for the last 7 damn years, and these hot flashes are killing me. So this is why I've got this desk fan blowing at me so that I'm not dripping with sweat. And that was one of the inspirations for me wanting to write a book about older women so that we could explore some of that as well. But yeah, I run this writing podcast because, I was given so many opportunities by amazing writers who helped me along the way. And I had so many emerging writers reaching out to me, asking for advice. And during the pandemic, everything shut down. And I was like, well, how can I reach more people with more advice? And despite never having listened to a podcast, I decided to launch my own podcast. And it's actually gone extremely well. We've had 1.3 million downloads. And we are now having so many authors reaching out to say, I landed my agent, I sold my book, thanks to advice that we got on your podcast. And that is just so incredibly rewarding because we are all here tonight because we are first and foremost readers. And every new book that comes out into the world for me is something to celebrate.
Wow, 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 wow. That's like so amazing. I didn't realize that I know of the podcast, but I'm ashamed to say I haven't listened to it. But that's incredible. And what a success, especially in a world that is so saturated by podcasts. Like that's a lot of downloads.
I was so surprised by the response. Honestly, I remember the day I got 100 downloads, I said to my husband, there are 100 people who have listened to my podcast. I said, and probably 95 of them are friends, but still, this is great. And then, it took off because I got 2 literary agents to join me on the podcast as co-hosts. And what they do is they read query letters and the first 5 pages to critique them, to help writers really polish up their submission packages so that when they go out on submission to agents, they're much more likely to land an agent. And, that's an amazing service, and they do it for free. We all do it as this labor of love. And we just, it's been incredibly rewarding. It's wonderful.
Wow. That's amazing. So if anybody on the call tonight or anybody listening to this at home later on, if you're interested in writing, then this is a huge resource for you. So I encourage you to check it out for sure. But back to you as an author and to you. So you've written 4 books, I should say. But they're all very, very different. So, and they cross different genres, which is somewhat unusual. Usually somebody finds their sort of like wheelhouse and they really operate within there and they sell the first book. And so what has that experience been like for you, from starting the first book to where we are now?
My first book, I think they say that most authors' first books are very autobiographical. And my first book that got published, If You Don't Know the Words, is kind of literary or book club fiction. It takes place in South Africa during 1976, which was the year of the historic Soweto uprisings, when white South African police opened fire on Black children who were protesting, being taught Afrikaans in schools. And, they killed, they to this day, they still don't know how many children were actually killed, because so many of them who were injured, their parents would not take them to hospital in case they would get arrested there. So they say it's anywhere like between 200 and 700 children. And, I was a white baby, 5-month-old white baby at that time, who lived sort of 20 miles away from where this absolute atrocity was taking place. And I was being cared for by one of the very people that the apartheid government had decided was less than human. And that was my childhood maid, Eunice. And, I was raised to be racist in a regime like apartheid. You are brainwashed from when you are very, very young to be racist, to view yourself as this exalted race. And I was lucky to have this amazing woman in my life, Eunice Ngogodo, who was my caregiver, who helped me see through all of that and realize how appalling, my society was. And so I wrote that book as a tribute to her. She turned 99 this year. I got to see her just after her 99th birthday in South Africa, which was incredibly special. And that book was my love letter to her. And it was me coming to terms with all of these conflicted feelings. And then I wrote my second novel, If You Want to Make God Laugh. There we go. Yeah. Which looks at the South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy, Nelson Mandela becoming president, Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all as the backdrop when we have 3 female protagonists. And then, both of those books, I said everything that I wanted to say about South Africa. And I started to have conversations with many Black South African authors who were struggling to be read on the international stage. Their stories were only being published in South Africa, and they were incredibly frustrated about that. And so I decided that instead of being part of the problem and being a white author who was telling these stories that were being published internationally, I was going to advocate for many of these Black authors so that their stories could be published internationally. And so I moved away from telling South African stories. My short story for Audible is called The Prin Viper. That is a dystopian tale about a dystopian future where as soon as a woman gets pregnant, she has to stand trial in order to be allowed to give birth to her own child. And it's a 2-hour Audible. It's got many twists and turns. And then after that, I went fantasy and I wrote The Witches of Moonshine Manor. So I have been really all over the place. And you're right, it is unusual because publishers do like you to pick a lane and stick to it, which is, it's kind of frustrating because one of the reasons why we authors is because we're so creative and we want to express that creativity. And I think it's sad that just because you've written one romance novel, people expect that from you your whole life, or because you've written one thriller, people expect that from you, your whole life. And look at Margaret Atwood. I'm not comparing myself to Margaret Atwood in any way, but I'm just saying she's shown that an author can do many, many different things.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody, if you do want to ask a question live or you want to type it in the chat, please feel free. I love audience engagement. It's always fun to have that little. So I picked up this novel, and you can't see it because of the blur, which is starting to if you want to make God laugh, as a result of reading The Witches of Moonshine Manor and loving it so much, And so I haven't read it yet, but I can't wait to sort of see the difference in I mean, to be fair, when we can talk about this a little, the Witches of Moonshine Manor is very like political. It's got a lot of really heavy themes throughout. How important was that when you were writing it?
Yeah, that's very important to me. And that's something that comes through no matter what I write. I often say that I write from a place of rage. The things that keep me up at night, the things that make my blood boil, the things that make me so angry, which is generally injustice, which is generally prejudice. These are the things that really, really upset me. And so these are things that are always going to find their ways into my novels. So the first two looked at racism, grief, anti-Semitism, homophobia, because these were all big things in South Africa. And, when it came to writing The Witches of Moonshine Manor, there was a lot that I was angry about again in the world. Women's rights being taken away from them, the fights that we were still having, seeing trans people having these huge targets put on their back. These were things that were just really angering me. And so when I sit down to write a book, I do not plot it at all. I don't plan it at all. I have no idea where the story is going. I create these characters and I give them agency and I try and make them as fully formed as possible. And then I go, okay, now you run and I'm going to follow and let's see where the heck we end up. And, there is a lot of social commentary in my novels. And even though The Witches of Moonshine Manor is considered a very funny novel, a bit of a madcap romp, if you are paying attention, you will see that rage simmering just below the surface.
Totally. Okay, so Rita has asked, how did you come up with the recipes in the grimoire? They were fascinating.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I had a lot of fun with those. So what I did was, firstly, I did so much research in terms of witches and witch books and witch mythology. And something that fascinated me about the grimoire is that it was one of the first places that women could take all of this knowledge that had been passed down for centuries through the oral tradition. Because remember, women then were not allowed to go to school. They weren't taught how to read or write. And yet women had so much knowledge in terms of the natural world, what herbs helped with menstrual cramps, what herbs helped with fertility, etc. And they weren't able to write this information down. So it was mother-daughter passing this information down for centuries until finally one woman in the family learned how to read and write and put it in a book. And that was essentially what the first grimoires were. They weren't about magic spells. They were about ways to help other women. And so I really wanted to pay tribute to that tradition of women having so much knowledge, so much wisdom, and their whole lives being prevented from sharing it. And so I got a whole bunch of grimoires and I read through them, and they were all much more serious than what I wanted to do. And so I started making things up. But I firmly believe in getting expert help. So after I made a whole bunch of things up, I contacted a naturopath and a herbalist, and I said, please look at my spells in my grimoire and tell me if we can use them. And she's Scottish, and I unfortunately can't do a Scottish accent, but she said to me in a very nice way, she was like, oh no, Bianca, you are going to burn a lot of hoo-hoos if you go ahead with these spells the way they are. She was like, you haven't got the right balance of base oils compared to essential oils. And I was like, we don't want to burn any hoo-hoos. We want to pay tribute to the hoo-hoos in this book. And so she fixed them for me. And then I tried them all on myself. I was like, if anyone's hoo-hoo has to get damaged here, it should be mine. And it was wonderful. It was just so awesome to put these things together. And they worked. And I had so much fun doing it.
Love it. That's hilarious. The things that authors go to, right?
Right, for research, the things we do for research. Yeah.
Absolutely. Haley has asked a very good question. And sort of like going into the different personalities, because like this book is so chock full with personalities.
Yes.
Haley would like to know how you came up with all the different personalities behind each of the women. And I will extend that a little bit further and ask you if they're based on anyone specific or if they're all just completely fictional.
Yeah, so when I begin writing, characters come to me first because I don't plot things out. I don't know where the story's going. And for me, it's important to come up with really fully formed characters who feel like you know them in real life. Or if you don't feel like you know them, you feel like you want to know them in real life. And so when I begin writing, I put a whole vision board together. In my writing den, I cut out pictures of actors or actresses or people that I imagine to look like my characters. And then I start giving them personalities. Now, definitely some of them are based on real people. So for example, I am very much, I'd probably say I am 20% Queenie, no, 70% Queenie and 30% Persephone. I am that control freak, A-type, Capricorn personality who struggles to ask people for help, who struggles to accept help, who just wants to help everyone, but overextends and takes on too much. So I felt Queenie's struggle. I really felt her struggle very much. Then Ivy was based on my best friend, who is a healer and a homeopath in Edinburgh as well. And she just, her powers of healing and her powers of empathy, I'm in awe of. You know, she is able, there are people who come to her after 10 years of not getting any help in sort of Western medicine. And here's the thing, women get gaslit by their doctors all the time. Women get told, oh, it's nothing, it's just nothing. And unless women fiercely advocate for themselves, you know, there are horror stories of women who've gone to doctors early on and they've had cancer and they weren't believed and the tests weren't done. And, you know, they ended up dying because of it. And she's someone who listens to women, who helps them fiercely. And I wanted Ivy to be a tribute to that. Then I have a few friends who are a little bit Jezebel, and they really make me laugh. And I feel like we all need a little bit of Jezebel in us. And then, you know, Persephone was based on my nieces and nephews. She's a composite of this younger generation who I'm in awe of, because they are just so much more in tune with the earth, with what's happening in the world. They care so much. They're much kinder, I find. You know, they're the ones who school me and go, oh no, B, we don't say that anymore, or that's not very kind, or that's not very nice. And so I wanted to show that intergenerational backwards and forwards with Persephone and the rest of the witches. So, you know, in the beginning, it's me getting to know these characters. It's me writing them. And until I really feel like I know them, you know, it probably takes a few drafts before I really feel like I know them. But I know that I know them when they suddenly do things that surprise me, when they out of nowhere, you know. I don't want to give spoilers. Can I assume that everybody on the call has read the book? Yes. So, for example, I did not know that Tabitha was a ghost when I started writing. I knew that she was an agoraphobe. She was stuck in the manor. And then she started speaking through Widget. And I was like, what is happening here? Why is this crow translating for her? This is kind of weird. And then I established she was dead. She told me she was dead. And I was like, oh, what the hell? How did that happen? Tell me all these things, Tabby. You know, and for me, it's just this magical, mercurial process, because I know logically that all of this comes from my subconscious, but sometimes it just feels like I'm channeling these people. You know, there were days I felt like these witches existed in the world and I was just channeling them and they were heckling me to write the damn book.
So what is it like then when you finish a book? Because I've talked with a lot of authors, and a lot of them are often sad at the end of a book. And for you, I feel like that must be like at another level almost.
Very much so. It feels like I feel bereft. There's a part of me that doesn't want to finish the book because I feel like I have to say goodbye to them. But, you know, so for example, my first novel, Hum If You Don't Know the Words, the two main characters, Robin and Beauty, I loved them so much and I wasn't able to say goodbye to them. So I snuck them in as cameo appearance characters in my second novel. And so, they live on in my imagination and in the imagination of my readers. And certainly I'm hoping that at some point I may be able to write a sequel or a prequel for the Witches of Moonshine Manor. And then, these women can have a life of their own again. But yeah, it does feel like saying goodbye to really special friends. It takes me forever to pull down the whole vision board, because I still want to live with them and chat with them every day.
Oh my goodness, that's so fascinating. And I feel like everybody will be so thrilled to hear there may be a sequel or a prequel. I don't actually know which I would prefer.
Well, so when I speak to a ton of book clubs and I say, vote for which one you want, sequel or prequel. So I'd love for everybody to say here, but it seems that most people want a prequel. Yeah. They want to see the witches as little girls, and they're really interested in Great Aunt Mirabelle. So, I might end up doing that. But I think in the sequel, I could have a lot of fun with Persephone growing into her powers and her sort of kicking butt. So I think I'd have fun with both, but I think a lot of people are saying yes, prequel. So yeah.
Well, you've brought her up, Persephone. I'm going to say her name wrong. She's an important character in the story. Can you tell us a little bit about why she is in the book?
Just arrived. There was that scene where the witches, somebody knocks on the door and the witches all group and they're expecting this whole mob of angry men. And they opened the door, and here was this young girl with her red scarf and her corkscrew curls telling them that she was there to fight the patriarchy. And I was as surprised as anybody else. And I was just like, okay, let's see where this goes. And then she had a dog called Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I was like, well, that's cool. And, she just stepped in and she kind of stole a bit of focus from the witches at certain times. I have the problem with my secondary characters that I have so much fun with them that they think they're the main character. And then I have to sit them down and go, oh, no. You're one of an ensemble cast, or you're a secondary character. But, she just was so much fun to write. She's just so idealistic. And I feel like we all began as that. I think of myself at that age, at 15, you think so much about the world and everything is wrong or it's right. It's black and white. And, you just want to save the world and you believe you can do it. And I think it's so sad that as we get older, that sense of wonder and that sense of I am so powerful, I am going to change the world gets eroded. And so I wanted to show that, in each of us, there was once that teenage girl who was just so idealistic, who was just so fierce and so amazing. And sometimes life kind of, beats her down in a way, but I wanted to pay tribute to that. And I wanted us all to be reminded of that young girl we once were.
I love that. I liked her as a character, and I loved her dog, of course. Haley, I see your question there, but before I get into that, I'm going to just ask one more question about character, since we're talking about that. And I'd love for you to speak briefly about Magnus, because obviously when he's introduced, everybody is real revved up to like hate this gentleman. And it turns out very differently than we expect.
Oh, yeah. For somebody like Ruby, she deserved so much to be completely loved for who she was, for who she wanted to be. She needed to be seen. And I feel like the sisterhood did that from when she was young. They protected her. They saw her. Of course, Ursula, was desperately in love with her. And so she was hoping for something else. But I wanted to give Ruby that. I wanted her to have this great love of someone who saw her for who she was, who accepted her for who she was, and who, just wanted to love her and protect her and be with her. And he was it was incredibly sad writing Magnus's story, because I wanted him to, I wanted them to have their happy ever after. But in terms of story, they say that as writers, we need to create characters who we love and then we need to torture the hell out of them the entire story. We need to keep throwing obstacles at them and all kinds of terrible things that happen. But I've also been sort of accused in the past of, I've had some readers go, I think she's a man hater. She writes these terrible men. And that is not at all true. I love strong men who advocate for women. I love strong feminist men. Oh, sorry. There we go. I love strong feminist men who are not threatened by strong women. And so, I wanted to write that kind of male character who was like that. And he was just, and I wanted to surprise the reader. I wanted to build up this kind of, what are we going to see here? And then just be wonderfully surprised by how great he was.
I liked that. I liked that whole aspect and the whole storyline there. That was one of my favorite parts. I do want to touch a bit, and Bianca, we touched a bit about on this just via email, and I went on to explore it further, and I did include it as a discussion question, but is there a particular reason why the main character's demographic age in the book may not be what is commonly portrayed in novels? And I would like for you to answer that, but I'd also like for you to discuss sort of like the experience since writing the novel, because like I was floored when you told me that.
Yeah. I wanted to pay tribute to women who are older. We don't see women in their 70s and 80s much in fiction. It's younger women or maybe women in their 50s. And like I said in the author's note, we as women have done quizzes our whole lives to find out which character we are, which member of the Babysitters Club, which Sex and the City character, which one of the Golden Girls we are. And then that's it. It's like we stop existing past a certain age. And what infuriates me is that I'm not even 50 yet. And yet every day, the amount of adverts and the amount of messaging I am getting on social media, in magazines, newspapers, is how dare I age? I must spend so much time, so much money, so much resources, so much mental and emotional energy doing everything in my power to stop myself from looking my age. And that infuriates me because every year is a gift. And I have some friends who turn 40 and are so depressed that if you wish them for their birthday, they don't even want to speak to you. Same happens when they're 50 and when they're 60. And yet I know women who were some of the fiercest, most fabulous, most amazing women I have ever met who did not even live to be 40. And that is devastating to me. That is so devastating that these women didn't get this experience. And yet here we are being given the gift of every year, and yet we allow ourselves to be depressed about it because we've bought into this BS that we lose something when we age, as opposed to we gain so much when we age. And so I wanted to pay tribute to these older women. I wanted to show that as women, we get to choose how we age. You don't have to be a grandma who's sitting knitting and baking cookies and who whatever. If you want to be that kind of grandma, wonderful. You get to choose. But if you want to be a Jezebel and you want to still be having many men when you are older, then that is your choice. That is your prerogative. If you want to be like Queenie and be pretty much asexual and, you don't care about things like that, then choose that for yourself. But let us stop buying into this nonsense that aging is a terrible thing, that we should be depressed about it. And so, I wrote this book to just show that aging can be something wonderful. It can be something glorious. And I was pretty shocked by some of the Goodreads reviews I got and things like that, 1-star reviews, people saying things like, oh my God, this is disgusting. I do not want to see old women having sex. That's the grossest thing I've ever read in my life. And I'm just like, right? And it's like, oh, can you hear me? Oh, you can hear me now. Yes. Okay. This is age prejudice, and you are being prejudicial against your future self, which is really not. You will get to age. Yeah. Are you not hearing me?
It was cutting in and out, but
sorry.
we can hear you again.
Okay. Yeah. So, I'm just like this.
No, it went out again.
Oh man, now
Sorry. Oh, we can
let's
hear
see.
you again.
Now.
Yeah, it's fine. It seems fine, and then I don't know what happens.
Okay. Yeah. So, and it's younger women who are leaving these kinds of reviews.
Right.
And I'm just like, what do you think that when you get to 50, you stop having sex, you stop being sexual, you just close up shop and that's it? And, I was shocked by these kinds of reviews because it is so prejudicial and it's ageist. And I just found it incredibly depressing, I must be honest.
And you're right. I went and looked at some of these reviews. I mean, there's not hundreds of them, ladies. There's just like a couple, but yeah, they were from other women. And you're right. You hit the nail on the head there.
And then I had someone go, oh, I love this book so much. I just wish the women were in their 40s. And I was like, but then you've missed the whole damn point of the book. Is that these are older women who have still got so much to offer. And I wanted to do this thing because so many witch books are about mothers and daughters passing the magical line. And I wanted to explore what happens if these witches were orphans? What happens if they didn't have mothers to teach them this? How can found family come into effect with this? And also, something else that infuriates me, because we're going to speak a lot about rage, is when I see a news article about some woman who has been murdered and who has been found murdered. And then everybody says things like, she was someone's mother, she was someone's daughter, etc. And I'm like, yes, that's all true, but that is not why her death is sad. She was herself, and she had value as herself. You do not have to be someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's wife for your death to be a tragedy. And so I very purposefully took these witches and made sure that none of them had gotten married. They had not had children, that they got to choose how they aged. And they were still so interested in so many things when they were older. Ivy was still working in her conservatory. Queenie was still working in her laboratory. They all had interests. They all had different strengths. And they all chose to age very differently.
So Haley, before we go on, let's ask Haley's question. She just wants to know how long it took you to write the book.
Oh, wow. This book was so fast. It was like a fever dream. I wrote it in like 5 to 6 months. The first draft of this book, it just flowed. That's why I felt like I was channeling these witches, because it felt like they were just telling me their story and I was just typing it down. And, so yeah, it was super quick to write this one.
Your other 2 books, did those take longer?
Oh yeah. How many, if you don't know the words, took me like 4 years. If you want to make God laugh, I was on contract for that book. So I only got given a year to write it. So I had to write that one pretty fast. But still, none of them were written as quickly as this one was.
Joanne has a question here. She wants to know how you steered the book away from horror or occult and made the relationship about women and relationships.
Yeah, you know what? It was always going to be about women in relationships, because that's what fascinates me. Something that really fascinated me when COVID happened was that I got contacted by a whole bunch of book clubs who suddenly said, can you Zoom with our book club? And I would Zoom with them, and I established that so many of these women were in their 70s and 80s, and they were learning how to use Zoom for the very first time, purely so that they could maintain their sisterhood, their relationships with other women. They couldn't get together for their wine clubs anymore. They couldn't get together for their book clubs anymore. They couldn't do all this thing, but boy, were they still finding ways to support each other emotionally, and just be there for each other. And I did not know not one man in my life had Zooms to speak with other men during COVID or to offer support. And that again reinforced for me how important it is for women to take care of each other, to hold each other up, to be there for each other, to boost each other. So this book was always going to be a tribute to women and relationships. I could have written this book as a non-magical book. It could have just been a book about, women in their 80s who were about to lose their home. I just wanted to have a more fun element to it, and magic allows for that. But honestly, if you took the magic out of this book, it would still be a book about feminism, about aging disgracefully, about aging into your power, about standing up against the patriarchy. And so, that was always going to be front and center.
Thanks, Joe, for your question. The Witches of Moonshine Manor is inclusive of minorities and encourages environmentally friendly habits. Can we touch on why those two are important themes?
Yeah, very much so. Because, again, like I said, this place of rage, I hate seeing prejudice. I hate seeing injustice in the world. I hate seeing bigotry in any form, whether it's against people of color, whether it's against people who are gay, whether it's against trans people, and what we as human beings have got so much more in common than what we have differences. If you get together with another person, regardless of their culture, their language, their race, their sexual orientation, what they want is the same things that you want. They want security. They want to be loved. They want to self-actualize. They want to achieve their dreams. They want to pursue their goals. They want their family to be safe and to be taken care of. And I feel that if we focus on our similarities more than what we focus on our differences, we would be so much kinder and more evolved as a society. And all of my books tackle that. My first two books looked at racial prejudice in South Africa, but it also looked at anti-Semitism and homophobia. And this book, looked at the same again. I've forgotten the second part of the question. Sorry, what was the second part?
Sorry, I just said, how are these important themes to you? The
Yes.
minorities, but also the environmentally friendly habits.
Yeah. Young people these days, it takes the Greta Thunbergs of the world to care about the planet and it's the kids who are the ones who are so fired up about these things because it's their legacy. We are handing this dying planet to these children and expecting them to fix everything, which is, it's too late for that. And so I wanted to focus on environmental issues. And, I always feel that if people can learn from my books while they are being entertained, then that is an amazing thing. And I try not to beat people over the head with messages that I have. I try and sort of slip it in there and give them something to think about. And I know that I've got it right when, I've had some women in their 70s reach out to me saying that they have grandchildren who are transgender or non-binary, and they were really struggling with it because they couldn't understand it and they felt weird because it wasn't things that they had experienced in their generation, and they didn't know how to support their grandchildren. And the way that I wrote Ruby really helped them understand and put things into perspective, and it helped them have conversations with their grandchildren that they otherwise might not have had. And that for me is incredibly rewarding, to know that that's something that someone has read in my book, has really thought about and is acting on.
So I have a question here that, you've kind of answered it because you've kind of depicted which one you feel you are yourself. But the question is, do you have a favorite witch?
Oh my goodness, I love all of them. It's like saying, which is your favorite child? I just can't. Each of them is so strong and so amazing in their own way. Jezebel's rage room, the way she deals with rage, man, I want a rage room. I want a rage room so bad. Queenie's very much like me, but she would certainly not be my favorite because all the things that infuriate me about myself infuriate me about Queenie. I'm like, for goodness sake, woman, ask for help, accept help, stop thinking you need to do everything. And Ivy, I absolutely adored. Tabitha was such an interesting character. And, my heart bled for Ursula. She was the most complicated character I think I've written, because, you know, we can have such good intentions and we can still do bad things that have unintended consequences. And then to live with that for the rest of our lives, you know, for Ursula to have lived with the guilt that she lived with, and all the rest of that, and the heartbreak, etc. And Ruby, I just adored Ruby, and I adored Persephone. I honestly can't pick a favorite. And I loved Widget, and I loved Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So
fair enough. That's sort of what I expected.
yeah.
So I do have one more question, and ladies, if anybody has one last minute question before we wrap up, but my question for you is sort of stems from your research. And well, sorry, I definitely have two questions because we want to know what else you're working on.
Okay.
But before that, when you were talking about the different the different potions that were included in the grimoire, you discussed sort of like having to try them all out. And I just wondered if there was any other interesting ways that you did research for the book.
I read a lot of work about witches, what constituted witchcraft, why men started coming for these witches. And honestly, what I was able to deduce after all of this is that witches were the first feminists. They were the very first women who refused to go from their father's house to their husband's house. They refused to just be married and have babies and not want anything more in their lives. They refused to be dictated to by the church, etc., etc. And of course, because they were ungovernable, you know, they were living outside the rules of society, which made them so dangerous. And, you know, that's something that I wanted to bring to my book, to show that it's not necessarily magical powers that made men in the town come for these women. It was their independence, it was their intelligence, it was their fierce, you know, the way they advocated for themselves and each other. So, you know, I did a lot of research on Salem and the Salem witch trials. If any of you know those stories, you will have picked up some of the names of the men are the same names of the people in the Salem witch trials. So I did a ton of research on that and just used just a very little bit of it in terms of that for the research. Sorry, what was the other question? I go off on tangents.
No, I mean, that was it. Just the just research and
Yeah.
what like specifically you did for the book.
Yeah.
So Desiree asked, I was wondering if you could expand a little on your motivations for making the men's behavior be due to their over drinking the alcohol that was spelled by the witches.
It's not all the men's behavior that was like that. Many of the men were calmed by this elixir, but it was Persephone's father who, because of his intense grief, because of drinking more than what he should have, because he was going through such grief, that interfered with him. A lot of the other men were much better for it, much better human beings with happier wives and happier children for the witches' interference. But I did want to look at unintended consequences. You know, the witches were trying their best to make the town a better place, to make these men better people. But we can have the best intentions. And sometimes we don't think things through and we don't see those knock-on effects. And that was something that I wanted to show, that, you know, I didn't want to paint the witches as being innocent and perfect and everything they did was perfect and everything the townsmen did was bad, because that is not realistic. You know, I wanted my witches to be deeply human, to be flawed, to be damaged, and to be limited by their own experience of the world and their own perceptions of the world. And, you know, somebody like Persephone being the next generation will hopefully, you know, not make those kinds of mistakes, will think things through a little bit more. But, you know, all of these things that I put in, it's really to make the reader think and to say, oh, wow, okay, so you do something for really good reasons to stop men being aggressive, etc. But then in one instance, because of these different circumstances, it actually goes the other way and it actually, you know, comes back to bite you in the butt because it's actually worse than what you were trying to treat.
Desiree, I hope that answered your question. Thank you, she says. So yeah, we're gonna wrap up now, but please tell us what are you working on now and when can we expect it?
Again, I've gone off on such a tangent. I feel so sorry for my agent, Cece, who has to keep figuring out how the hell to market me because I just keep going off on these tangents. So I have decided to write a closed room murder mystery with magical people. It is Knives Out meets Succession meets El Canto. And I am writing it without plotting it. Do you know how difficult it is to write a murder mystery in a closed room without being able to plot it and without knowing who the killer is, why they did it, etc. So I am being as surprised, hopefully, as the reader is. And I'm putting a ton of puzzles and cryptic clues in the novel that I want the reader to be solving as they're going along. Because I don't know about you, but I'm obsessed with Wordle, with Sudoku, with any kind of anagrams, with the New York Times spelling bee, etc. And to have a book that includes all of that, to make the reader be a participant in the story. And there are certain parts of the story where you have choose your own adventure and you get to go which option you are likely to go on. So it is a puzzle of a book. It is breaking my brain in the most wonderful ways. I'm now 30,000 words in, which is about a third of the way in. And I will be pitching it to my editor next week to see if the publisher is interested in it. And I'm just keeping everything crossed that they will be.
Wow. Well, we wish you the best of luck. It sounds, I could see Joanne like applauding you there. She looks very
Joanne like puzzles. Yeah, me too, Joanne. You and I on the same page there. But in the front of the book, in the author notes, I actually go, I'm sure you've been taught never to write in books. Because if you're like me, my teachers always told me, don't write in books. And it's made book signings fraught because I go to book signings and people ask me to sign in their books. And I'm like, I'm not supposed to write in books. But now I've said in the author notes, please get your pencil. Please mark up this book, underline things, solve the mysteries, get as involved as you possibly can, because I want you to be as involved and a part of the story as the main characters are.
Oh, wow. It sounds very fascinating and very different. So that's exciting.
Again, very different. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And thank you, Bianca, so much for writing such a wonderful book, of course.
Thank you. Thank you for choosing it and for everybody for reading it. I know there are so many books out there. And when somebody picks my book over the millions of other books, because I know what to be read piles look like. Mine is 3 carts big, my to be read pile. So when you pick mine, I'm just incredibly honored. Thank you.
Rita does have a question. She wants to know if you have any books or authors that
Oh my goodness, I have so many. One of my favorite books of this year was Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. It was just a triumph of a book. One of my favorite books before that was Sarah Winman's Still Life. It is a chunkster of a book and it's just so beautiful and life affirming and amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed Kate Atkinson's latest book as well. I probably read 5 books a week for the authors, all the authors that I interview on my podcast. I read their books before I interview them. And so it's like, I love every genre. I love memoir. I love thrillers. I love romance. I love everything. But probably my heart belongs to like literary fiction.
Wow, that's an impressive number.
And if anybody has not read the Thursday Murder Club series, please get that. It's 3 books. It is written about people in their 70s who are living in a retirement estate in England, and they are solving murders in their retirement. And there's 3 books and they're hilarious and they're amazing romps. So get those as well. The name of the podcast is The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. The first half of every episode is us critiquing query letters and opening pages of emerging writers. But if you skip past that, you can get to the author interviews. I've interviewed Jeffrey Archer, I've interviewed like some freaking amazing authors, Emily Henry, award-winning authors, people who've won Booker prizes, and then people who write romance novels, and they all have such interesting things to say. And I actually interviewed the guy who wrote the Thursday Murder Club, Richard Osman, and he was just delightful. So listen to that episode as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And thank you so much, Bianca. We'll get this up on our
Thank you.
website.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Bye.